So you've purchased a neat antique or collectible from online or maybe some antique mall or something like that, and you're wondering, is it safe to leave this thing plugged in or even plug it in at all? In this video, I'm going to go over some safety tips and considerations whenever you purchase something like this from anywhere, especially from somebody that you don't know. Things you may want to keep in mind that are very important. This important electrical safety information is valid for a broad range of antiques and collectibles, not just radios like what you see here. So whether you collect toasters or fans, or whether you're interested in collecting those, or radios, antique televisions, record players, guitar amplifiers, there are some very collectible televisions out there like Predictas and things like that. This information is valid for pretty much all of this, and there will be something to take away from the information that I'm about to share with you that'll pretty much hit home on all of these topics. So definitely stay tuned, as there's a lot of very, very good information that I'm about to share with you, and some information that could potentially protect you from some pretty dangerous situations. So let's get started. This radio here has been restored, and whoever did the cabinetry work did a really nice job on it. There's some dust on it because it has been sitting for a while, antique dust, but they did a very nice job on the case. And if we look at the back, even inside, it looks very nice. I do see some tape here. Looks to be all original. The chassis has been cleaned up. The original line cord is even the original cloth line cord. Now, one thing to keep in mind, that if you're buying an antique like this and it is unrestored, it isn't safe to plug these things in. Reason being is, in here's a very large power transformer in the back, there's a rectifier tube, and then there's some filtering going on in the front here. So there's a filter capacitor which filters the hum out of the radio, so that stops the radio from humming. A lot of the times when these haven't been restored, those filter capacitors are bad, and what ends up happening is they short, and they'll glow the rectifier red, destroy the tube, and sometimes burn out the power transformer. And of course, plugging something like this in that has not been restored or that has not been gone through is not safe, because, of course, something like that can, you're going to get a lot of smoke out of the chassis and all that kind of stuff. So you're definitely not going to want to be doing that. So this one supposedly has been restored, and we're going to find that out here in a bit. The original cloth line cord is in very good condition. So let's move this up here. The original cloth line cord, as you can see, very, very nice. There is no tears or rips in it. For originality's sake, many people want to leave these original line cords on here. There are reproduction line cords that look almost identical to this, except a little less faded. Looks like it's been pretty faded from the sunlight over the years. But you can get reproduction line cords that are up to today's safety standards. So basically inside here is a regular extension cord, and they just put a cloth covering on it to make it look like an old extension cord. In a restoration, I would prefer that over this. For originality's sake, it is nice to have this. So if you're going to have this restored by somebody, or you're going to do the restoration yourself, you can keep the line cord in a bag and put it with the radio, and somewhere down the road, if you ever sell the radio off, or whatever it is that you have that has a cloth line cord on it, whether it's a fan or some old radio or television or something like that, you can provide the older cord with it. But for safety reasons nowadays, I would still get rid of this and put a modern line cord on this. Now, if you're saying, well, how would I tell the difference? A lot of the times you can tell because they have a molded plug on the end. This is a plug that has some screws on it, and you take the wires and then you tighten them in to the actual plug. Somebody's made a little cap for this because it's missing. And if you look in here, you can see the old wiring, the old cloth wiring coming around. So now, in a case like this, it's always a good idea, because we're going to try this out, to make sure that these are tight. So I'll just put a screwdriver in here, and yes, they are very tight. So no problems there. So the wiring is tight. A lot of the times these are loose and back off, and of course, if something like this was to get plugged in and those wires are loose, of course, big sparks happen. So this is going to be tested on an isolation transformer and current limited variac supply, a very safe option to test out these older radios. Again, this was supposedly restored, so we'll find that out here very, very shortly. Another little bit of line cord information for you. Some of these older radio sets were series sets, and they had a cord that looks just like this, but the cord itself is a very long resistor. Those line cords were known as curtain burners, and for good reason. The line cord itself got very hot because there was a drop between the plug and the radio, and that would drop basically the voltage down, because of course you have a series set of tubes in there, so you have loss in the cord itself, right? So the cord is dissipating and it gets nice and hot. So this is not a curtain burner. This is actually just two wires inside here. So anything that is an old series set that does not have a power transformer. So this has a very large power transformer inside. The sets that don't have a large power transformer and have a cloth cord like this, there is a chance that that cord is known as a curtain burner. So something that you may want to consider getting modified, or looking into that modification yourself if you're getting into this, to get rid of that hot line cord. There's modifications that you can do with a capacitor for dropping, and for some that are wanting to do it a little bit more serious, you can get small transformers and things like that and add them to the actual radio itself. Now looking at this, you can see in the back here, I'll zoom on in. You can see in the back side here, somebody has added some tape. This looks like hockey tape. Added some tape. This wire here doesn't just carry basically low-level audio up to the speaker. In a case like this here is an electromagnet. So the older radios like this didn't have a thing called a permanent magnet speaker. So there's an electromagnet on the speaker here, and that electromagnet actually acts as a couple of different functions. So it magnetizes the speaker so the speaker works, and it also acts as a filter for the power supply in the radio, reducing hum. And because it's acting as a filter, in the schematic you'll also notice that on the cone itself of the radio, you'll see a voice coil and a thing called a humbucking coil. That humbucking coil is there, well, because we have an actual choke right on the speaker itself here, and that's used for some ripple filtering, all right? Now, these wires here carry full B+ up to the speaker. It's not just low-level audio here. We have actual B+. So whatever the B+ of the radio is, whether it's 250 to 450 volts DC, that will carry that up to this electromagnet up here, and of course to the audio transformer. So that always needs to be kept in mind. If we look down here very carefully, I'll focus you down on that, I can already see that the wire itself, you can see this wire right here. You see how that's broken right there? Well, this is a sharp edge on the chassis, and because this is carrying B+, that could short on the chassis. So this is something already that needs to be fixed. Now, again, keep in mind that this is supposedly restored, not only the case, but the chassis itself. So we're already seeing signs of issues. That could be an issue on the back side here. Another thing to keep in mind is a lot of these older radios, they had a plug. So this would be on a plug, so you could unplug the speaker from the radio itself and take the chassis out and leave the speaker in the actual housing or the cabinet. In this case, there is no plug on the back, so the speaker needs to be removed first, that taken out, put off to the side, and then of course the screws on the bottom side of the chassis on the case here, and the knobs taken off for this to be slid out of here. Now, it's not really safe to be handling cables like this when the radio is actually plugged in, especially if you know that there's an issue like this. Remember that there's full B+ on these cables here. So that big transformer in the back there, if I can get a light here, something to shine on there just a little bit better. This one here might not be so bright. That big transformer that you see in the back there, what that does is that takes the line voltage, which is 120 volts AC, and that'll step it up to usually about 350 or so volts. And it depends on the radio itself, the receiver. Some go to 450, some are 350, some are even 250. It just depends on the actual radio's design and the engineer, but it'll take that up because vacuum tubes run on elevated voltages. So the anodes of the vacuum tubes will run at quite a bit higher voltage than what's coming from the line here. So that's what that big transformer does in the back. The reason that the transformers were so big back in the day is because this transformer will run not only at 60 cycles, it'll run down at 25 cycles. So yes, way back in the 30s, parts of the United States and Canada had 25 cycle electricity. And 25 cycle electricity is pretty slow moving electricity, so you need a larger core on the transformer to deal with that. The faster the AC, so 60 cycles, and then moving up, you can reduce the core size. And that's the reason in switch mode power supplies, you have such small transformers in them that produce so much current, is because they're oscillating at a very high frequency. The higher the oscillating frequency, the smaller the core size. The lower the oscillating frequency, the larger the core size of the transformer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some screwdrivers or nut drivers and loosen off the speaker here and get the chassis out, and we'll take a look on the inside and see exactly what's going on. Now, whenever you're undoing these screws, you want to be very, very careful that you don't pierce the speaker. It's very easy to drop a screwdriver or the like, and then of course what ends up happening is you drop it on the speaker and it goes right through the paper, and now you're having a pretty bad day. So you got to be super careful with these screws. Sometimes they bind up a little bit, of course these little radio like this is from the 30s, and of course depending, yours could be older or newer. And then just put these in a tray. All right, all the screws are undone on the speaker here, and I'm going to carefully lift this out of here, being super careful not to hurt the actual paper on the speaker. And as you can see, this speaker here is in pristine condition, so I definitely do not want to hurt that speaker. So what I'm going to do is just put that off to the side here. So that is off to the side of the radio on the mat here. This is on a very soft mat, by the way. It's very, very soft foam mat. That's why I have the radio leaning forward here. Move that over just a touch. And then what I want to do is tackle the screws on the bottom of the radio. So what I'm going to do is this one here actually is pretty loose looking already, yeah? So what I'm going to do is I will undo this one here, and then I'm going to tip the radio back up and take these two out, because I don't want the chassis falling forward and causing damage to the actual dial face of the radio, because it's going to put a lot of weight on that. That transformer in there is very heavy. One thing that I should mention about these screws that are sticking through the radio here, they have nuts under the speaker itself holding the screw tight to the cabinet. A lot of the times when you undo the nut on top of the speaker, like the nuts that I just removed from these screws, when you remove those, these will spin. So a lot of the times you'll have to put your hand around the front side of the radio and hold the actual screw as you're unwinding the nut. Keep in mind, these studs are very long, so the screw studs here are very long, and they do come to a point, so when you do put the speaker back in, be very careful you don't pierce the paper with these very long screws that are sticking through the face of the radio. I'm noticing lots of washers stuck under here as well, obviously to space this up a little bit. Kind of interesting. Okay, so now the chassis should be loose. I'll move this closer to here, get this out of the way, spin this around, and now the knobs are usually tightened on with screws. So you got one there and one here. Well, that's interesting. That doesn't seem to do anything. That sure spins smoothly, almost like a bearing. Have have to look into that. Kind of interesting. As we can see, the whole chassis is loose now. So I'll turn this around, get these screws out of here so I don't mark anything up. Get that all out of the way. Very interested to see what's going on with this. Move this over here, like so. Give myself a bit of room. Yes, there are washers all over the place spacing this. So it's been tightened down on washers. I don't know if you can see that. So I guess this has been put under here to space this so that the dial face sits in the window properly. I'll get this flipped upside down, get the bottom cover off, which really is just a bunch of screws here. And on the case, I'll show you these screws. I don't know if you can see that. On the back side. So some screws here, get these screws out here, and there will be some on the face of the radio as well, and this bottom pan will just come right off. I'll talk a little bit about this pan and what they did in the future to eliminate this to save some money and of course save some weight. There's some screws here as well. There should be screws all over the place on this pan, but some of them are missing, which is not uncommon. All right, all the screws are removed, so I'll just put this up on its side, which will allow me to get the bottom of this off. Yikes. So, wow. So here's a perfect example of why you don't believe people when they say they've restored something unless you really know them. So this has somewhat of a new filter cap installed here. Looks like something a little newer. I don't know what they've done here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fasten this, or just keep this on an angle here, and I'll set the camera up so we can take a closer look at this. I'll be right back. This radio has not been restored. It has a few parts tacked in to make it work, and that's basically all that's been done here. So whenever a radio like this is properly restored, all of these capacitors are replaced with modern capacitors. Any capacitors that run from the line cord itself to the chassis are replaced with something like an X1, Y2 rated capacitor. Those are safety capacitors, modern safety capacitors that would normally replace something like this that they would have just used in the old days. The line cord itself has no fuse in it. Now, whenever a radio is restored like this, the hot side of the line cord, so the replacement line cord that would be put in this radio, would be polarized. The hot side of that line cord would have a fuse, and then from the fuse it goes to the switch, and then from the switch to the power transformer. That is a must nowadays, especially if something like this is going to be left plugged in, even in its off state. The fuse is always the very first thing in line with the hot, and then from the other side of the fuse it goes to the switch and then into the radio. So if anything goes wrong, that fuse will go away and of course protect you and the radio receiver. The value of the fuse has to be chosen by the amount of draw that the radio, the amount of current draw that the radio is taking, right? So there's a little bit of math involved with that, and I will go over that in the future to safely select a fuse to fuse these older radios. Now, this is a replacement filter capacitor here that somebody has tacked into circuit. They've bent this over and tacked this in. This is not modern. This is an old cap. This is the only modern part that I really see inside this radio receiver. So this radio, even though it is restored on the outside, is not restored at all on the inside. Now, don't be fooled by that. Many times these older radios will still work with these older parts and pieces inside. It's just that it's not safe to run these older parts and pieces because a lot of the times they boil and they'll start smoking, and it causes damage to other parts of the radio, especially when these are used as decoupling capacitors and they're on the rails and stuff inside this radio. on the B plus rail, what they'll do is they'll start to boil and smoke and cook, right? And as you can see, they have tar on the ends and they have a cardboard shell on them, so you know what that is. Now, when I said I would talk about the bottom side of the radio, older radios like this, they have a metal can on them, which makes them quite a bit safer. So in the future, you'll notice that a lot of the chassis like this were left open, and they put the actual radio itself on an asbestos sheet, and that can be seen in many of the more modern type radio receivers. So stuff that basically started, 40s and 50s, they really started to do that stuff. And, a lot of people are worried about that sheet. Now, there are many different ways of getting rid of it or handling it, and some people even, they spray them to stop any fibers from coming loose for originality and leave them in. Now, of course, that kind of stuff is up to you. If you do come across a radio that does have one of those sheets inside it, be very careful. It's very easy to spot. It's a nice, usually clean woven sheet, and you can really tell that, you can tell the material that it's made out of. So the radios of this era were pretty much pre that. So they had a metal can on the bottom. Actually, the metal can is much nicer because it shields the radio itself. And of course, it's, makes the oscillator itself stable inside and keeps the radio nice and stable, so they stay on frequency very well. So they kind of drifted away from that to save some cost. Again, went to that sheet. And some of the more expensive radio receivers still use the pan on the bottom here to shield them inside. So we have a volume control or a tone control and on off, or one or the other. This would probably be the volume. They usually did the tone and on off in one, and this here looks like it's a switch. So this pulls, yes it is. So this one that spins freely pulls in and out. So this is going to be for the shortwave bands or for the broadcast band. Very nice switching selection or section here that they've done inside this radio receiver. Very solid. So chances are this would be a pretty good shortwave performer, just the way that they've put this all together here. So the cans on top to tune the RF and IF transformers and things like that, they have adjustments on the bottom here, but if you need to access them, they actually unthread. So you can see they have a threaded base here, and you can actually take the can off itself to get inside if you need to service anything. And then of course when you're done, you would put this back on. You tune this with the cans on. You can never tune these with the cans off. You could pre-tune them like that, but the final tune always needs to have the can on. Because, of course, there is some coupling to the actual can, and that needs to be taken into consideration. So the adjustments are here and here. You can see the adjustments on the bottom. Some adjustments on the back here as well. So this radio needs basically an entire restoration still. So the case is beautifully done. The knobs look great and everything like that, but what's inside is a completely different story. Is this radio safe to leave plugged in? In no way, shape, or form is it safe to leave plugged in. Is this safe to operate and let run, say, for any extended period of time unmonitored? Absolutely not. This radio needs a lot of work in order to be safe. And again, that fuse is very important. Again, remember that this transformer here is, wasn't built yesterday. It's built a long, long time ago in the 30s, in the 1930s. So, we're probably dealing with, possibly a late 80s, 90 some odd year old transformer, depending exactly when in the 30s that this was put together, right? So a fuse is a definite must, and a polarized line cord. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to this. If you would like to see me do an entire restoration on this radio receiver and make this entirely safe, you can leave that down below in the comments. What I'll do is I'll put the pan back on the bottom here, and I'll put this all back together for now. We'll turn it on the isolation transformer and current limited variac supply, and see if it does come to life with all of these old parts. I imagine it probably will, because just the necessities have been replaced. It tells me that somebody has got this working. To what extent, I really don't know, but we'll find that out here in just a moment. I'll get this all back together. All right, I've got some black tape on that wire on the back side there that was close to touching the chassis that runs to the speaker, just to stop that from shorting, because that was looking pretty bad. Let's turn this on and see what happens. This is attached to my isolation transformer and current limited variac supply. So I'll make sure everything is down. what's going to happen here. I just have a piece of wire on the back here, just acting as an antenna. Just lay that out on here. I don't know if it's going to pick up noise or if it's going to even work. Let's find out. So it is picking up. Now you can see where this would be very deceiving. You would think that this is restored, you know, looking at the case and everything, and of course, you know, the person selling this saying that it is restored. That would be very deceiving. So it is trying to receive. With an actual outdoor antenna, it may actually do pretty good. Let's see if that's the right binding post. It is.
Ukrainian President Zelensky today. Garbage that might be a major illegal Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Mark.
So it is receiving. And again, you could see a lot of people would probably just go, okay, yeah, that's absolutely fine, right? Because it is receiving, not knowing what's underneath the chassis. And again, looking on the underside of the chassis, electrically, this is not restored at all. You know, it has basically one brand new looking cap. All the rest of it is old parts and pieces. And there is a lot that goes into making one of these things completely electrically restored. So there you have it. Now keep in mind, this is a transformer type set. And these are some of the warnings and precautions for a transformer type set. And of course, you can use the line cord information for fans and all sorts of other things like toasters and other things like that. The line bypass capacitors that attach to the chassis, again, that is in all sorts of different types of antique electronics, guitar amplifiers, televisions, radios, and all of that. I mentioned earlier the X1, Y2 rated caps. That's a very, very important safety improvement for any of this older electronics, whether it be this radio or any of the other things that I've just mentioned. Installing a line fuse is very valid for pretty much all old electronics, whether it be a fan or whether it be, you know, radio, television, piece of test equipment, guitar amplifier, especially the older stuff. There are some, I guess you could say, transformerless guitar amplifiers out there, and that's a completely separate warning on its own. I'll have to do an entire dedicated video to transformerless sets and you know, transformerless guitar amplifiers and things like that. They made all sorts of things with no transformers back in the day in order to save money. Again, that transformer is worth a lot of money inside this thing, and you save a lot of money by eliminating that. So they made lots of series sets, and that has its entire own set of warnings to it, because a lot of the times the chassis itself can be hot. It's attached to one side of the line cord. So units like that that have phonograph inputs and things like that can be very dangerous if you don't know exactly what's going on, especially now when the capacitors inside those older units are shorting. Sometimes the connection between the line cord and the chassis is actually direct. So again, I will make a future video on that, safety warnings about transformerless sets. So I hope this benefits you and helps you along with you know, your antique and collectible you know, shopping and knowing what to really look for and things like that. Of course, you can't pull a radio or something like that completely apart. You kind of have to take the person's word for it, but you can end up with something like this. Looks beautiful on the outside, but what's on the inside is a completely separate story. If you found the information in this video beneficial and you figure others can benefit by this, definitely pass this video along. There are many people out there with antiques, not just radios and televisions and record players, but toasters and fans and old microwaves and all of this stuff. And pretty much this can all fall under the same category. It needs to be restored or repaired by somebody that knows what they're doing, somebody that you can really trust. If you're enjoying these videos, you can let me know by giving me a big thumbs up and hang around. There'll be more videos like this coming in the very near future. There'll be lots of repairs, tear downs, restoration, circuitry design, and all of that great stuff on this channel. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, definitely subscribe and tap the bell symbol. That way you'll be notified as soon as I post a brand new video. If you're interested in taking your electronics knowledge to the next level and learning electronics in a very different and a very effective way, and gaining access to many of my personal electronic inventions, creations, and designs, you're definitely going to want to check out my ongoing electronics course on Patreon. I'll put the link just below the video's description under the Show More tab, and I'll pin the link at the top of the comment section. So if you click on that link, it'll take you right there. All right, until next time, take care. Bye for now.